Good morning to all my friends and family, and welcome to this episode of Jim's 5am Club. It's Tuesday morning, or should I say it's Wednesday morning, and my voice is still hoarse from the rally that we enjoyed on Monday, the May Day rally for workers' rights. A rally that is held throughout the world, and in countries like France you may get 500,000 people to 1 million people marching through the country, and it does tend to get quite violent in Paris, in France, in all the regions of France, as the French, when it comes to revolutions and when it comes to rallies and when it comes to the rights of working class people, are probably the most passionate people in the world. What I'd like to do today is introduce another book summary, a very interesting book summary entitled, just let me have a look here, Caffeine Blues. And it's written by an author named Stephen Cherniske. Stephen Cherniske, who wrote a book on caffeine. And Stephen is a biochemist and an author of health style books. And he's an expert when it comes to caffeine, coffee, tea, soft drinks, and all of those food products that we enjoy on a daily basis throughout the Western and Eastern world. And what he does in this book is he investigates the impact that caffeine has on our health and how it impacts the cultures and the development of people throughout the world. He kicks off the book with an observation that approximately 80% of Americans are hooked on caffeine. So when it comes to any particular drug in the world, caffeine has got to be one of the most significant drugs that is ingested by people of all cultures and all walks of life, and it comes to us in different forms. As I mentioned before, caffeine can reach us via coffee, via tea, via chocolate, via other candies, via soft drinks and various other foods. It's hidden in many different foods, just like sugar is hidden and fats are hidden, so too are caffeine. So if you're trying to manage your caffeine intake or to measure your caffeine intake, it's going to be very, very difficult, because everywhere you look, everywhere you scratch, you'll find elements and evidence of caffeine being supplied in all food types, or very, very many food types. And what we'll do in this book summary is we'll step through and try and see the impact that caffeine has on each and every one of us. So what the author says here is that caffeine, as we mentioned, which is also available in tea, so people who don't drink coffee tend to drink tea, and people who don't drink coffee and tea will tend to drink soft drinks. So either way, caffeine will find its way into your bloodstream. And the author says that the caffeine has various effects on the people who ingest it. It can affect the brain. It can affect the brain function. It affects your hydration. Coffee tends to dry us out. It affects our sleep patterns, our hormone balance, and also increases the risk of osteoporosis, diabetes, ulcers, PMS, stroke, heart disease, and it also can impact our energy levels in various ways. For those who know me well, you'll know that one of the things that I don't do is drink coffee. And I'll just go through and just explain to you the reason why I don't drink coffee. It's got nothing to do with health benefits, but it has something to do with my own personal life. When I first became a father, I realized that on becoming a parent, your whole life is redefined, your whole life is changed, and it changes not only you, but many of the people around you. When my daughter Catherine was born, I became a father for the first time. My wife became a mother for the first time. My mother and my mother-in-law became grandmothers for the first time. My father and my father-in-law became grandfathers for the first time. And my wife's sisters became aunties for the first time. And it just goes on and on. So the impact of a birth of a person impacts the relationships and the interaction with people all around us. When my second daughter was born, Artemis, I sat and thought how dramatic having a second child coming into your life is. It's both dramatic and a non-event at the same time, because nothing much really changes. With the first child, everything is just new and experienced for the first time. With the second child, potentially, nothing much changes unless you change something. So as a young parent, what I thought I'd do is I'd introduce a change to my life to signal the importance of the change that came with the birth of my second daughter. So, don't know why, but I decided at that point in time to stop drinking coffee. I enjoyed coffee. My parents had a cafe. I would often sit and stand at the coffee machine and be a barista for days and hours on end. So I made thousands and thousands of coffee. I loved, and I still love, the smell of coffee. But I thought that the right thing to do would to make a change on the day of her birth, and to stick to that change for as long as I could. And I've got to proudly say to you that ever since that day, I have never ever drunk coffee from that point onwards. And I just amazed myself. But one thing I did realise when I stopped drinking coffee is that for a week or a week and a half, I had this throbbing headache. I had a migraine that was thumping in my head, and I absolutely thought that there's no way in the world that I would be able to stop drinking coffee, and I'd have to start drinking coffee again. But what happened was that after about a week and a half, the discomfort ended. My body detoxified from coffee, and I started feeling better in more ways than one. So that in itself was a real wake-up call to me saying, well, if I'm indulging, if I'm drinking something and it has such a control over me that, I physically felt bad by not taking it in, then this stuff probably isn't all that good for me in the first place. So I was happy to have stopped drinking it. Since then, I don't need any substance in the morning to wake up. I wake up in the morning and I'm as bright as a button. I don't need any substance, I don't need anything to make me wake up and have a clear head. And I thank myself for taking this stance 33 years ago to this date. So once again, I don't drink coffee for no other reason than for a family reason. But had I read this book back then, I probably would have stopped drinking coffee, knowing the impact and the ill effect that caffeine has on one's health. The author then goes on to say that coffee is an addiction, and there are coffee societies throughout the world. I know that Greeks are big drinkers of coffee. Australians have become coffee snobs and big drinkers of coffee. Everybody, everywhere you look, seems to have a coffee cup in their hand, and they're drinking coffees throughout the day. So it's not just the morning coffee, like an Italian will just sip on an espresso. Australians are drinking coffee throughout the day. Mugs of coffee, milkshake containers full of coffee, and I guess this is expressed and replicated throughout the world. It's become the beverage of choice. Both coffee, tea and soft drink seems to be what everybody wants to drink throughout the world, and with that come the health challenges and all of the other impacts. Because as we said, there are some outputs, there are some things that caffeine seems to stimulate, and it's a lot of negative health conditions. Because what happens is, if you drink a little bit of coffee, it may be okay, but we drink coffee in excess because it's culturally now ingrained in society. It's available everywhere you go, and it's easy to procure, and an affordable luxury, as my friend John DeBassa says. The author then goes on to talk about the origins of coffee, where he clearly states that nobody really knows where coffee originated. There are many legends, there are many folklore stories, there's lots of talk, but the most popular one that the author seems to reflect is back in Ethiopia. There was a goat herder who observed his goats that would often eat red berries from a little shrub, and following the consumption of those red berries, the goats would be jumping about and prancing about and look quite lively. And then the goat herders would go and sample those red berries, and they too found that it lifted their spirits in many ways. And that was, I guess, from legend, the beginning of coffee drinking for humans. Then at around 600 AD, the author says that coffee reached Arabia, and it was used for medicine and food. It was used to ferment wines. And around about the 13th century, Arabian monks, Arabian Christian monks, would roast coffee to drink and it spread like wildfire from monastery to monastery, because the monks found that they could drink this substance and it could help them stay more alert, to wake up, to be clearer-headed, so that they can perform their prayers throughout the day, which often, sometimes they'd have to wake up at midnight, at 3 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning. So they had to be alert at various times of the day, and they reverted to the substance of caffeine to help them with their prayers. And following that, it was transported to Turkey, to Italy, to France, and the Arabs had a strict control of trade. But over time, coffee seeds were smuggled out of Arabia and found themselves in different parts of the world, and now coffee is farmed in many places throughout the world. Another thing that helps stimulate the export and the consumption of coffee, especially in America, is that at one stage American colonialists drank tea just like their English counterparts, but they boycotted tea because of King George's tea tax, and started drinking coffee and used coffee as their beverage of choice. And now the Americans drink, believe it or not, one country, America, drinks one fifth of the annual production of coffee, which is unbelievable. In terms of coffee beans, there are two types, there are two families. There's the Arabica and the Robusta. And the Robusta is the more common version, which is grown throughout the world at lower regions. And interestingly enough, Robusta has 2 times the level of caffeine than what Arabica has, and is the coffee that is used in all the more common, cheaper brands, the sort of brands that you get at the supermarket. So what makes coffee so popular and so easy to farm is that it is a hardy, self-pollinating plant, referred to as a tree, but it's an evergreen brush, evergreen shrub. And the Arabica coffee shrub, for example, will only yield about 1 kilo, so half a kilo to 1 kilo of beans per year. And it needs to be harvested by hand. And once you get the beans, they need to be fermented, washed, dried, hulled, peeled, then roasted, then pulverized and transported. So it's a very, very manual, a very, very integrated sort of process that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. Hence why it's become more and more expensive over time. What you find in coffee, according to this biochemist, is that there are over 700 substances found in coffee. There are 200 acids, and there are many pesticide residues, because coffee, the coffee shrub is one of the most sprayed, one of the most, one of the plants on the world that has the most pesticide sprayed on it, even though caffeine is a biological pesticide. Caffeine is a pesticide, a natural pesticide, and that's that pesticide which gives the seeds and the leaves a bitter taste that discourages the eating of the coffee by animals, by pests, and by humans. So interestingly, as we said, coffee is the most heavily sprayed plant on earth, and we've got to put it into another category, that caffeine is a psychoactive drug which leads to heart palpitations, anxiety, panic, insomnia. And it's interesting. It's interesting to see that people who are very, very health conscious are either tea, coffee, or soft drink drinkers, which is quite remarkable. But the important thing to understand is that very, very few people understand how much coffee, how much caffeine they actually ingest. The industry has generated, interestingly enough, a lot of propaganda. So a lot of the reports that you read, a lot of the stories that you hear are backed by the coffee, the caffeine industry, the soft drink industry, the tea industry. So it's important just to put it into perspective that what you read and what you hear about coffee isn't all that, I guess, doesn't have tremendous substance behind it. What I find interesting is that only 1% of caffeine is expressed from the body. The rest needs to be detoxified by the liver, and it takes 12 hours to just detoxify just one standard cup of coffee. And to once again put into perspective, most people have more than a standard cup of coffee a day, because we're drinking coffee now in milkshake containers. It takes 7 days to detox from coffee and 3 weeks to remove the hormones that are impacted by coffee, and for them to reduce, because basically we're overdosing on coffee, overdosing on caffeine, and many people, most people, are addicted to caffeine in one shape or form. As I say, caffeine comes to us in different forms. It comes to us in chocolate, it comes to us in coffee, it comes to us in tea, it comes to us in soft drink, it comes to us in hidden places, such as sweets and food additives. So the important thing, I guess, from this author is to wisen up to how coffee makes it into our bodies, into our lives, and to try and minimise it where possible. I'll leave it there today. I may have to do a part B, because this is a really interesting book, and it has some interesting truths that we all need to be aware of, as the impacts, the health impacts, the social impacts of coffee and caffeine are wide-ranging. Anyway, take care, have a great Wednesday. I look forward to coming to you from a different place with a different message of empowerment. We can talk about things that can help us through our day, through our lives, help educate us, help leverage us, and help make us better people. Take care, yasas, and we'll chat again soon. Bye for now.